The Electoral Commission has postponed implementing the Political Party Funding Act. Now, reacting to the IEC's decision is My Vote Counts. That campaign is urging parties to actually disclose their funders voluntarily. It says this would show that the political system is transparent and that it's accountable. Now, joining us to give us some more analysis on this story is researcher from My Vote Counts, Zahira Grimwood. Ms. Grimwood, thanks very much for your time. I mean, as we were covering this story last year in the run-up to this legislation being signed into law, this bill being signed into law, part of the excitement was that it would be ready before elections 2019.
Well, we hoped that it would be ready before the 2019 elections, but we were concerned that they were going to delay it already at the parliamentary stage when the legislation was being drafted. But Parliament actually drafted the legislation quite quickly. And so the last stage that the bill was at Parliament was at the National Council of Provinces, and it was then passed in June of last year. From there on, we tried to put pressure on the President to sign it by November. And that would have been the latest date that he could sign it in order for the IEC to be given enough time to set up the necessary institutions that they would need to beef up their capacity to allow for the implementation of the Act. And civil society has been campaigning this for many years, and it's very unfortunate that the Act won't be implemented, and that citizens won't be informed, particularly of in the recent election period, of where political parties are receiving their funding from, because surely there would be a spike in the amount of donations that they receive at this very crucial period. And unfortunately, there isn't enough information. We've relied on investigative journalism and whistleblowers to come out and expose this kind of information, but the political parties themselves need to be accountable, and we've called upon them to be accountable because we don't think it's very complex and that there's actually a need for legislation to force them to disclose. There is a constitutional court judgment on the matter between My Vote Counts and political parties that was delivered in My Vote Counts' favor last year. The paragraph in that judgment actually says that in the absence of there being legislation to allow for access information on political parties' private funding, citizens can actually write to political parties and request the information, because what is essential, with this judgment is the aspect of voting, and if citizens are denied access to such information, they cannot exercise their right to vote fully, effectively, because they're not, effectively informed of this very crucial kind of information that can, alert us to, what kinds of relationships political parties have with private interests.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, My Vote Counts has also appealed to political parties to voluntarily disclose that information. What's the response been?
So last year, there were activists from Right to Know and My Vote Counts who requested the information, and political parties, either don't respond. The ones that did respond didn't give the information that we requested. We've been trying to engage political parties on other aspects related to, a new campaign we're starting on intra-party democracy, which includes questions on party funding and requests. We request to know if there's disclosure of their financial interests so we can evaluate political parties and how they function democratically. But political parties haven't been responsive. They're either very closed, or in general they are closed. They either don't respond, or they'll tell us that they're not obligated to give over the information. This just then speaks to the fact that political parties are acting as the gatekeepers and actually wanting to then encourage people to vote for them, but they don't want to give us essential information
that may actually contribute to us making the decision on who we might vote for.
Yes.
Zahira, I just want to ask you around this question of political parties voluntarily disclosing their funders. The fact that the situation is, as you've just described it, with parties' general response being that they're not obligated to disclose that kind of information, I mean, that gives you a very uneasy feeling.
Yes, the political parties are supposed to be, the links between voters and the state, and they're supposed to, govern in the interest of their voters. But they're essentially just disregarding the constitutional principles of accountability and transparency. I mean, we saw that, there were some parties that, the ANC in particular, that, trying to take credit for, formulating this legislation, but then, even before, the bill was drafted, there were, various other instances where, political parties will always promise that, okay, they're going to, take it upon themselves to allow for legislation or disclose. And it's this back and forth game, and, civil society has to, tirelessly and continuously, fight and request for the information, going to courts, participating in these kinds of processes with regards to the legislation in public hearings and such, and trying to lobby, political parties to take this seriously. But essentially, this was just what this shows is that there's a lot that political parties have to hide, and they're very fearful of what this legislation could mean for them. We've seen that the ANC has essentially been on trial with the Zondo Commission, but there's been speculation of the kinds of relationships, for example, the Democratic Alliance has with property developers, and if this act was implemented, there would be more information that could allow us to pinpoint, who is responsible when it comes to the corporate entities that have these kinds of relationships with the Democratic Alliance. We don't have a strong enough paper trail, to actually make that claim. Political parties then having access to our state resources. We've now seen this. We see the link that private interests have, even looting public resources. And this is a rampant issue from the local level to the national level in our country. And it means that political parties are going to hide this information for as long as they can.
Yeah, it does appear to be so, just given the response that My Vote Counts has had regarding that appeal for political parties to voluntarily disclose their party funders. Thanks very much for your time. Researcher from My Vote Counts, Zahira Grimwood, joining us there via our Skype line.